So here we are again. Legal aspects of small business. I'm Sarah Holtzclaw. This module we're talking leases and contracts. This one's a short one, but don't let it fool you. These are things that you are going to be legally bound by, so you need to make sure that you read all the fine print. Look at that, a disclaimer. Um, Make sure, as I said, that you have somebody else look at your contract and your leases first. Don't just sign on the dotted line before you have other people look at it. Okay, so let's start talking leases first. There are a couple different kinds of leases. You have commercial leases versus residential leases. The commercial lease is really more about where you're going to be, um, but you can also lease residential property. So let's first, in this particular case, we're going to talk about more the commercial. And I want you to make sure that when you are looking at leases, that you make sure there's a certain number of things here that we're going to talk about. Determining your location, and when you're searching for a location, you're going to compare different locations and look at um, there's a lot of things you want to think about when you're looking at a location for your business. You know, that how easy is it for people to get in to um, to your place of business? Is there adequate parking? Is there enough um, is there enough space for you to do business? Who's next to you? All those kinds of things that will come into play when you're looking at locations. They'll also come into play when you're negotiating your lease. So let's kind of dive into it. When you are setting your priorities, you need to know what kind of space you need. You need to look at where you need it to be located. So you've done your homework and you know what city or what county that you want to locate your business. So let's just take Fremont. It's a pretty big city. So now you know the kinds of um, zoning laws and permitting and that kind of thing that Fremont has. So now you need to look at the um, type of location. And you need to evaluate the space. You need to know what kind of location you need. Do you need a high traffic retail environment, or can you go into a more industrial area that doesn't get a whole lot of foot traffic? So you need to know what is important to your business. You need to know if appearance is important. Can you take a warehouse, or do you need to have it as a cute little um, uh, Dutch gabled house? Is that, are you doing tea for women and their daughters, or are you doing a dance studio, or those kinds of things? You take different types of space, so as you're evaluating the spaces, you need to know kind of what you need in that. You need to develop some kind of negotiating strategy. How much clout do you have? Know the um, that they need you just as much as you need them. So make sure that you don't get bullied around. You do have the clout. And be able to make the decisions. Don't just sign on the letter because they've asked you to. There is such a thing called a letter of intent. So if you've done your homework and you intend to um, lease a space, but still need to do a little bit more legwork, you can sign something called a letter of intent. But when you do that, you need to make sure that that's a non-binding letter that you can back out of it, because they're going to come back and say, I haven't rented it to anybody else because you said you were going to, and they'll make you pay for certain things. So make sure that it's non-binding agreement. And be aware that there is no such thing as a standard business lease. So making sure that that when somebody says, "Oh, it's just, it's always, this is just the standard stuff," there is no such thing as a standard stuff. So make sure that what's in it is going to benefit you as much as it's going to benefit the landlord. There's certain things that you need to be able, and you can negotiate the length of the lease, and 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. You can negotiate that. Of course, it'll be your rent and your lease will be less the longer you say you will lease it, but make sure that that is the case, and that it's an appropriate, and maybe you start out smaller with a smaller time, and then the next time you renegotiate it's a longer one, just so that you can get your foot on the ground and get the business in place. Make sure that when you are, if there is such a thing as if there is a computation as to the amount of sales, that you know whether or not it's a net or a gross. Is it before or after taxes? Is it before or after all of your stuff is taken, all of your other um, expenses are taken out? And you can ask about modifying build outs, um, what happens to you. Can you do things modifying the building? Can you, will they, what do they take responsibility for? Do they take responsibility for the parking lots, the roof, the if there's their fire suppression systems and those types of things? What is it that is taken care of, and how often is it going to be inspected and going to be improved upon? Who's responsible for the maintenance? Who's responsible for the signage? Who's responsible for all of the things that it takes to run a building, right? If you are leasing something inside a shopping mall, you'll have to pay what's called a common area usage fee. So it pays for the janitors and the security and the cleaning up of the public bathrooms and the trash and the that type of thing. So there are different costs associated with the different locations. And then you also can negotiate renewals and what happens if you want to get out of it, right? Who's responsible for what if you want to get out of your lease? Do you need to pay for 3 additional months or a year? Is there a percentage of the annual lease or the monthly rent that you need to pay if you terminate early? All of this is negotiable, so make sure that you do negotiate it. Okay, so there are some things and some rules that you, when you're looking at leases, that you want to think about when you're negotiating. Again, everything is negotiable. Make sure that you don't take it for just what it is, what the other person says it is. Everything is negotiable in a lease. Educate yourself about the different things that can be negotiated or that are negotiable. Educate yourself as to what is the going rate in the area, what is the going price, what are similar properties doing, what are, so that you can say, you know what, down the street I can do this. Down the street says that I would be this, or the city says they're going to put such and such in location 2 blocks down. I'm not so sure that this rent is really worth it once that construction starts. Or so make sure that you know what's happening and what can is a reasonable things to be negotiating. Make sure that you value yourself. Um, if you've been a good tenant, don't be shy about it. If you so when you're renegotiating something, um, if you've been a good tenant somewhere else, don't be shy about knowing that, so that they can always go and call, say, hey, does he pay it on time? Does he complain about everything? That type of thing. Make sure you read the fine print. Certainly. Make sure that you when it says time is right, that's the length. Making sure that you can have a shorter lease or a longer lease, whichever is. Make sure it works for you. Um, if you need it to be a 2-year lease, then make it a 2-year lease. You may have to pay a little bit more, but you make it that so that you don't get stuck in a long-term lease. And lots of them will have lots of leases will have a renewal option. Um, don't feel like you have to renew it if you don't want to. You can renew. You can renegotiate at that time. You don't have to just turn it over and sign on the dotted line again. It's not all up to you means that there are other tenants in the building. Make sure that if there is a larger tenant like a Home Depot or Lowe's or grocery stores and that sort of thing, that you have something in your lease that says if they leave, that you get a and there's not a replaced tenant within a certain amount of time, that you get a discounted rent. And that because you are there in that location because of the draw of that major tenant. So if make sure that you put that in there. If they leave, that you benefit from that, because a lot of times um, it's not up to you whether there's a traffic, that you're relying on those larger tenants. The other thing, it's not all up to you, is that you make sure that you have an exclusivity clause, which means that you'll be the only insurance agent in that mall, in that strip center, in that area. You'll be the only Mexican restaurant. You'll be the only fitness center, so that they're not putting a competing business in the same area as yours. Um, Make sure you keep your options open, and by all means get professional help. All right, let's talk about contracts. Contracts are a written or expressed, so they don't have to be in writing. They can just be by handshake. And they can just be by, you said you would do this. It's been multiple lawsuits against people that said, I agreed to do this because you agreed to do X. So it's either written or it's an expressed agreement that you will, between two parties, there's got to be two parties to provide a goods or service for a price or for a something. There has to be a another side of the contract. There's a give and a take to a contract. Contracts have expirations. Contracts can have a reasonable amount of time if they are especially if they're not written down. They can say, you know what, I told you I'd do that 5 years ago. Circumstances have changed. So there is a reasonable amount of time. They can be revoked by the party who's made the offer, and you can make counteroffers. So contracts are a binding legal agreement. It doesn't matter if they've been written down or they're just talked, but they are a binding written agreement. Um, and to be enforceable, they have to have an offer um, of what is going to be provided. They have to have an acceptance. These are three things that are contracts: an offer, an acceptance, and consideration. So the offer is, this is what I'm going to do. The acceptance is, okay, I agree to that, and for that I will um, do X, meaning I will give you money, I will give you something else in exchange of value, in value of exchange for you, what you say you're going to do or give me. Um, but they've got to have those three things: an offer, an acceptance, and consideration. Um, Without that considerations, it's actually just considered a gift. Other couple things that they need to have is that both people need to be of age, so you can't make a contract with somebody that's under 18, and they both have to be in have the mental ability to actually know what they're doing. So you can't make a contract with somebody who happens to have a mental disability or is in a state of some kind of illness that they're not knowing what they're getting into. Has to Both parties have to have the intent to carry out what they've promised. Um, and the terms and conditions, also called the objects of the contract, can be legally enforced. So you said you were going to do X. I said I was going to do X for your, or Y for your X. Now you haven't done X. So that's legally enforceable. There are certain, we talked about this a little bit, but there are six basic elements of a contract: the offer, the acceptance, the consideration, the capacity, the promise, and the enforceability. All right, that's it. Told you it was going to be a short one. Um, the links and different things at the back of the module, check them out. Not exhaustive, but they are there to help you. Bye.